element of what I think is so important right now, especially in American church and the most, polarized time. And there's one side that feels like, oh, people my age and younger have no shot. They've given up. We're out. It's done. It's over. And on the other side, they're going, oh, I actually think there's more hope than ever, that more people will come to know Jesus and completely just kind of transform our entire country, world, globe.
Welcome to the Post-Christian Podcast, where we help you make disciples in our increasingly post-Christian world. My name is Bryant. I'm the campus pastor at Gateway in South Austin and Gateway Austin Online. I'm also the founder of Catalyzing Community. Sign up for our email newsletter at ericbryant.org and we'll send you free resources. Well, in today's episode of the podcast, I have a new friend with me, Jairus Copeland. How you doing, Jairus?
I'm good. How are you doing today, my friend?
I am good. We recently met through an event Erwin and Aaron McManus were doing, had a chance to talk offline. I was just so intrigued by the creative ways you have been doing ministry and even what you're doing now. We have a shared affinity or maybe an experience with
Right.
a huge Super Bowl outreach event. You
Yeah,
guys
for sure.
originated,
For sure.
perfected. We tried to adopt and did
Yeah,
for many, many years.
right.
But yeah, tell us about your previous ministry experience there in Cincinnati.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so my name's Jairus Copeland. I am born and raised Cincinnati, Ohio. We're here right now. We're getting some unexpected snow right now. So as I'm looking out the window, I'm really sad in comparison to you being in Austin. So I'm sure it's 80 degrees and you can golf. I cannot.
You
So
know, it's been a longer winter than usual.
mhm.
It's I haven't been out to play pickleball in a few weeks. It's been a little colder. But yeah, you were at a really prominent church there in
Yeah,
Cincinnati, done some really creative things. Talk about some of the more innovative ways you
yeah,
guys have
absolutely.
reached out.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I spent really the last 5 years or so working at a church called Crossroads Church here in Cincinnati, Ohio. So multiple physical locations, a big online presence. And so my role or job at the church went through a bunch of them like we all do, right? But the one I was kind of most known for was working with our preachers and pastors with their messages. So we would help resource them, help support them creatively, some interesting things surrounding it. And what you're mentioning just passed, actually, it's called the Super Bowl of Preaching. And so, I mean, it's probably in its 20 somethingth year.
Wow.
But basically, Super Bowl service was the least attended service, like church wide in America, right? So nobody was going to church that Sunday. And so Crossroads, my bosses and everything, decided, hey, what if we made it our most attended service? And so literally they have marching bands and they have tailgating and beer with a limit, promise, and hot dogs and popcorn and students playing football in the like main atrium as everyone's literally in there, like jerseys and eye black and teams and everything. And basically we have 4 teaching pastors and they each get a quarter, so about 5 minutes to preach a message. And it's everyone from people who are in and believers and attend Crossroads regularly to it's kind of a Cincinnati staple, honestly. So people from all over, all the churches come, and then also people who really have no affiliation to church or Jesus or anything. It's very much a kind of front door, open door for them to kind of experience it for the first time. And literally, it's national coverage, positive and negative, and local coverage, and the news is involved. And we have the Cincinnati Bengals here, and they're good right now, which is good. And so we have Bengals players involved, and commercials, and spoof commercials, and original kind of ideas, and funny stuff we create. We do a halftime show and everything. And it's a service really that we go from seeing over tens of thousands of people on a weekly basis to creeping into the six figures of like over 100,000, 200,000 people experiencing this on one given weekend. So for Crossroads, it's a really big thing that they do and partake in. And it's something people really, really enjoy around here.
Well, the hard work you and that team has put into it over the
Yeah.
years has really paid
Mm-hmm.
off. You know, we've done it on and off since I think 2017. And it's amazing how people love to see us get on stage and wear a jersey and
Absolutely.
make fun of ourselves.
Yeah.
You know, there's all
Yeah.
sorts of the bucket of chaos. I don't know if you guys had that,
Mm-hmm.
where there's a phrase we had to work into our 5-minute message.
Yeah.
And it's just a lot of fun. You know, we just have had so much fun with it. One of the funniest things to me was one year our Connect team created basically my head on a stick, along with the other
Hmm.
teachers, had their heads on
Hmm.
sticks so people could hold them up. And now my wife has that in her closet,
Perfect.
and scares me every time I walk in there.
Yep. Yep.
But
As it
it
should. Yeah.
it got just so over the top. But like you said, it's in many ways just a real creative way to reach people and get people in the door that wouldn't normally come, get people to
Yeah.
watch online that wouldn't normally come. Talk now, if you would. I mean, that those last several years, and really what you're doing now, helping other pastors. Talk about the art of communication and some of the ways you feel like pastors are maybe missing opportunities and ways pastors could improve as communicators. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I since working at Crossroads, so I left there probably in that would have been July of 24. It's now 2025. My main focus really is innovation, specifically in a creative and communication sense in the church, right? And that's a little bit of what you're touching on. I think the biggest thing, I'm not here to tell anyone they're doing it wrong, but maybe just offer them a new perspective is as you talk about the art of communication, I, as a young preacher and communicator, view it as an art. I view it as, the same way a comedian would take, 18 months to prepare their best special, or a musician will take all this time to prepare an album. Most pastors have a little less time than that on a weekly basis, but the effort, the preparation, the artistry and craftsmanship that can go into it is essential. And so for me, I view preaching and communicating not just as an art, but an opportunity really to connect with people in such a way that it goes beyond just the words of it, but even maybe into a more emotional, mental, spiritual connection. And the art of communication, that's Erwin and Aaron's coined phrase. So I can't just repeat it over and over, but it's something that I've consumed and really taken to, in the sense that as I look at the landscape and I talk to people, really what they're saying is, whether it's my staff, my congregation, my wife, whatever it is, I want to connect more. And the basis of connection being communication, in that it's not even just verbal communication, but it's physical. It's what you're picking up on in terms of how we interact in person. It's the idea that, if my wife is planning a date night for us, and I go, hey, I'm going to go practice golfing at the driving range, I'll see you in a couple hours, I'll let you know and I'll be back. She doesn't have to say don't do that for me to pick up on the, okay, yeah, fine. Like, I can clearly tell something's up. And so the idea that we are constantly communicating to people, even when we're not talking, which means we're constantly connecting to people. And so what I'm really trying to do is really kind of actualize for people a natural sensitivity that they have. And I believe sensitivity is not just being like emotional. And I'm an emotional guy. So growing up, people would be like, oh, he's so sensitive, whatever. And for a long time, I'd be like, that's my greatest weakness, is how sensitive I am. And I've kind of done a 180 or 360 or whatever the proper flipping is.
One,
Yeah, to being, I was failed math, sorry, but I can talk. To realizing that my sensitivity is actually a strength, right? And so as I enter rooms to speak, as I deal with pastors and clients and trying to coach them and consult them through these sorts of things, I'm incredibly sensitive, not just to what would be the right thing they need to hear, but what's the right way to say it. And this idea that we constantly, especially in the church, have the right thing to say, we don't always know the right way to say it. And so thinking about, as I'm in a room, as I'm reacting to people in real time, I'm not as concerned about it being perfect. I'm actually more concerned about it being communicated and projected in such a way that someone can actually grab a hold of that and go, that makes sense to me. I want to know more. I want to hear more. More than anything, I would call myself a sensitivity coach at this
yeah,
point in time. Yeah.
I like that. I have this, just realization that what we get to do is in many ways sacred. I just
Hmm.
had breakfast with a young man this morning, first time ever in church,
Hmm.
Jewish, Jewish young man, but he's on a search and he's thinking about Jesus. And it was so interesting to hear him share what he heard me say. And it was fascinating because there was a story I told that really connected with him, but it was also a graphic behind me
Yeah.
that he felt like God was using to speak to him. Like you said, people are coming in, whether they've walked with God for a long time or they're not even sure there is a God.
Right.
And they're heightened senses make them more aware of things that we might just take for granted. And I just think it's so important that we take those 30, 40 minutes really seriously,
Hmm.
and really let the Spirit of God guide us. I like what you said. The message that we have, it's eternal. It's something God has given us, but
Absolutely.
how we share it can actually really make a difference.
For sure. And I think too, even to the sense of, part of what made us connect was this kind of term of like innovation, right? And that's kind of like feels like a marketing term, but in all seriousness, it's a practice and an element of what I think is so important right now, especially in American church and the most, polarized time. And there's one side that feels like, oh, people my age and younger have no shot. They've given up. We're out. It's done. It's over. And on the other side, they're going, oh, I actually think there's more hope than ever that more people will come to know Jesus and completely just kind of transform our entire country, world, globe, and beyond at this point, right? So
Yeah.
this idea of innovation, though, is like, to me, inherently Christian in the sense that every Sunday we get up there to speak and talk. We're not meant actually, if you believe this, to invent anything, right? In fact, if you're inventing stuff up there, people are gonna be like, "Hey, man, you probably shouldn't be talking here," right? And so, it's not our job to invent new content, which takes a level of pressure off in terms of how we prepare and how we study and what we're here to communicate. But if anything, we're meant to take the source material we have, the Bible, scripture, everything God's given us in that way. And we're meant to innovate with it. We're meant to repackage something we already have in such a way that people would not just understand it, but it would kind of transform and transcend the current perspective or paradigm they have. And the majority of people coming to church who are actually there to like engage and meet people and kind of hear this message are people in some varying form of crisis. And anyone who's in crisis is mainly because their perspective and paradigm failed them, right? So it could be the person who's been in church their whole life and, they believe certain things that if I do this and I act this way and I, follow it to the nth degree, the Lord's going to be with me and nothing will happen that's bad and nothing wrong will come. And the reality is, I don't know about you, but I try my best not to find tension in my life. It finds me anyway. And so as I go through that, if I'm someone who has that kind of paradigm or perspective, it'll fail me. And I have to then go back and go, okay, well, I believe these things. Is the error on me or on him? And I'm going to say 10 times out of 10, it's on you, right? And so for that person, all the way to the person who's never heard of Jesus, has a kind of mental picture of what a Christian looks like based on what they've seen on TV or people they've interacted with in the street or outside of a stadium, to actually gain a perspective of like, oh, I'm actually valuable regardless of what I can produce for someone. And the mere idea of my existence is enough for someone to reward me with eternal life. I don't have to do anything. That's just like mind like boggling and blowing. And so
Yeah. Yeah.
taking an innovative approach in communicating Jesus to people isn't that you only use props and you only have LED stuff and whatever, but it's actually literally down to the cadence and the rhythm of how we communicate and the words we choose. And I think more than ever, people are the most sensitive to what they consume today. And so we have one of the best opportunities to innovate and connect with people because what we're communicating actually has eternal consequence, eternal value, and can impact people in the present day right now, too.
That's right. Yeah. It's so important that we partner with God. We're partnering with Him to advance His kingdom. And if you're interested in working with Jairus or learning more, the best way to connect with him is through Instagram, Jairus Matthew Copeland. That's Jairus.
I do have some questions for you, actually. While I have you here, so I know you're even going through a little bit of transitioning stuff with the podcast and like the
Yeah.
title and some of the subject matter. Can you fill me in a little bit more about that?
Yeah. I first started interviewing church leaders probably in the mid 2000s. And I've always found it as something really helpful to me. And at the very least, if there's some insights that I could take away from it, then I know it could help others. And I was using, as someone who loves innovation and loves new things, I was using a new webcast called Spreecast. And all of those interviews for I don't know how many years, 5, 6 years, disappeared when that company went out of business. And so I switched to YouTube, and which is stood the test of time. And so I've had different iterations. I did Start Good Things podcast with Rob Overholt, but really I've been doing the Post-Christian podcast since 2020. And in many ways, it was designed to help church leaders know how to effectively reach people and make disciples in an increasingly post-Christian culture. But if I were to really summarize what I'm trying to do, it really is to help equip innovative church leaders, people who are willing to follow the Spirit wherever He leads, who are willing to think outside of the box, to take this ancient, eternal message and share it in unique and effective ways. And so the name of the podcast is changing to the Innovative Church Leaders Podcast. We're going to still interview people who are doing things for the kingdom in unique ways. And I'm really excited about it, as I think it's just a clearer way to communicate really what my heart is.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. Why the specific, you talked a little bit about innovative church leaders, people who are pushing towards what the Spirit's leading, which we like to think everyone's doing that. And sometimes it's so out there, you're like, I don't know about that, right? What what
Exactly.
what became the connective tissue there from, our a focus on our society and the culture we're in to let me identify the individuals within that? What was the kind of shift there for you?
Yeah, it's funny. I went to what was called the Innovative Church Leaders Conference back in the early 90s, and that was one of my first interactions with Erwin McManus. Eventually went out and worked with him as part of Mosaic for 12 and a half years. And first a volunteer, then I was the youth pastor, then I was helping plant campuses, then I became the navigator, which was the executive pastor. And the way God has made me, I have futuristic as one of my strengths. I have just been really blessed by growing up in a Christian home. But over the 53 years I've been alive, I've seen the church struggle in so many different ways. And that's why I think I left to go help plant a church in Seattle that had a hope of reaching unchurched people. I was at Mosaic, which was a place where you could belong before you believe. At Gateway here in Austin with John Burke for 14 years, where we say, come as you are and no perfect people allowed. And I've seen the church in many ways effectively reach people that others would have given up on. Young people, old people, folks with a Jewish background, Hindu background, Muslim background, New Age, skeptics, atheists. And in many ways, I feel like there are a lot of pastors, church leaders who are more discouraged than hopeful. I feel like we're in a season where, as you described earlier, we're due for a season of renewal, and renewal that certainly can sweep across our country and impact the globe. But I think that the more we can connect to God's heart of bringing more of heaven to earth, the more we can just effectively follow His lead and encouraging each other along the way. I think that's going to really help. I wrote a dissertation, and it was getting my doctorate of ministry in entrepreneurial leadership. And I wanted to figure out what makes a leader who's able to create a culture of innovation. And I looked at the scriptures. I looked at historical leaders, Lincoln, Martin Luther King Jr., Mandela. I looked at church leaders, Martin Luther, Philip Melanchthon, people you may never have heard of. And I also had a chance to interview a vice president at Disney. I was able to interview an engineer at Google. And I just was looking across all these different avenues, these different sectors of society. And it was fascinating to discover 12 different types of skills that these people seem to have, or their teams have had, that actually not only were they innovative, but they created a culture of innovation. They became organizations, businesses, or churches that embraced not only the new, but the unique, and had an effect on culture kind of beyond what you would think a normal person would have. And that's my hope for church leaders listening to this, is that they gain a little bit of hope. They have a little bit more insight. I think of 2 Corinthians chapter 4 that says, therefore, because we've been given this ministry, we do not lose heart. I want to give some hope, share some resources, maybe even some insights from those I'm talking to, from my own experience, that we might be able to go out knowing that God is with us. He is renewing us. Things might seem difficult because they are difficult, but He promised us it would be. And along the way, I think that God is going to do something really, really significant the more we rely on Him and the more we trust Him, even if that means innovating in ways we would have never expected.
Absolutely. That's awesome, man. Seriously, that's exciting for me, a young guy who is definitely trying to go down that trail and seek out resources just like this one of, innovation, church leadership, and kind of what's next and being on the front end. Seriously, I appreciate the effort and all the work you're doing.
Jairus, thanks for taking some time to share what you're doing. And I'm just inspired by you. I'm just encouraged the next generation with an open heart, open mind. I just love what you're doing and really think, for those pastors, church leaders that are out there that could use some encouragement, some sensitivity coaching, learn how to be a little bit more creative. I highly recommend Jairus to you. Thanks for taking the time. I really enjoyed it.
Absolutely. Look forward to the next time.
Thanks for listening to the Post-Christian Podcast. For free resources, go to ericbryant.org and look for something new coming for church leaders in April 2025.